Pizza over there, if you're interested. We just took it out of the oven. So let's get started. Ron, do you want to open us up with a word of prayer?
Sure. Father in heaven, we just want to pause now and recognize why we're all here together. You are our God, Lord Jesus. Thank you for dying on the cross for our sins. We know you rose from the dead for our justification. We want to be better servants of you here on planet Earth. And we just pray that you'll sanctify this time. We dedicate this evening to you. Pray that your Holy Spirit will be working through Dr. David. And we commit the time all to you. We give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, just as the Europe was making fun of Donald Trump for his getting rid of all of the illegals, now they realize the same thing. So now they're doing the same. They're spending billions of dollars deporting the migrants that they invited over. So we're seeing that happen, the deportation strategy under the EU Migration Pact. Deportation is being implemented throughout the Pact on Migration and Asylum, which entered the force in June 2024 and is being rolled out via the National Implementation Plans, NIPs, for each country. So we're seeing that happen. Now, what I'd like to do is just review a little bit of what we did last week. But before that, I've got our memory verse for today, or the verse we'll just look at, Psalm 18, 24 through 26. Therefore hath the Lord recompensed me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands and his eyesight with the merciful, thou wilt show thyself merciful. With the upright, thou show thyself upright. With the froward, thou wilt show thyself froward. Froward is a King James version of the evil. And so how we treat others is basically how God is going to treat us. And somebody was asking, well, how can I get good grades? How can I gain riches? How can I find a mate? How can I get a job? How can I find a place to live? How can I have a ministry? How can I see others know Christ? How can I make friends? And there's a verse that covers all of those. You know where it is?
Robert.
Doing to others as you have them doing to you?
Well, there's a lot of verses that deal with that, but the one that kind of covers it all is Psalm 1, 2, and 3. You know, it is lighter than the law of the Lord, and his law does he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bears fruit in its season, its leaf will not wither, and whatsoever he does will prosper. One guy wants to know, well, how do I gain more money? Well, that's the verse right there. It's not through giving. I mean, giving does help, definitely. The Bible does talk about that. But if you really want that success, whatsoever he doeth will shall prosper. So, and that's when I find, if I'm having trouble in a certain area, I just take my Bible. It's had a rough life. I need to get it. I've got a new one. I just haven't taken it out of the box yet. But just take it out and start reading. And I just said that God just opens up things that I've never seen before. Gothard would say this, he would meditate in the word at night. And he says, my reins instruct me in the night watches. The reins is your gut brain, your heart brain, and your head brain. Your gut brain, through the vagus nerve, instructs your head brain insights that you never thought, you never even dreamed of. And that's what he found almost every night. And so he wrote around 60 books. Each one of those books has the greatest insight of any book I've ever read. And I attended the Institute in Basic Life Principles. He said that God will choose the weak things, the things that are not to bring to naught the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. He hated to speak in front of groups. He was scared to death to speak in front of large groups or any groups, and he hated to travel. So how does God use him? Speaking to 30,000 people at a time and traveling all over the world. And so I think God will choose not only the weak things, but he'll try to, many times he'll take the weakest part of our being and use that for his glory. What we probably are least likely to be successful at, God may use that. He also used the gifts that he's given you. So I'd like to start with the part that no pastor deals with, or at least most pastors don't, because they don't know what to do with it. And I asked Pastor Bob, I love Pastor Bob at Calvary Chapel East Anaheim. I said, where are you going to put the Battle of Gog and Magog? Where are you going to put the overflowing scourge? He won't answer me. Because it's very difficult to know exactly where to put these things. But I said, I think it has to happen before the tribulation starts. Then how can you hold on to eminence when that hasn't happened yet? And so people are asking, well, when do these things happen? And that's what the disciples were asking Jesus, and he gave them to them. But you notice that Jesus didn't teach eminence, Paul didn't teach eminence, Peter didn't teach eminence, James didn't teach eminence. None of the apostles taught eminence. Why?
Because it wasn't evident?
Well, that's right, because it didn't. That was written 2,000 years ago, and if they said Jesus was going to come back at any moment, they would have been lying. So they couldn't teach eminence. Now, James 5 talks about it a little bit. He's talking about Jesus' return, and he says it's like a farmer who plants a seed and he waters it, and he has to be patient and watching it grow. 3 times he uses the word patient, and the last one he says his coming is nigh. So Doc Bishore and I, we called up the head of the Greek department at Dallas Theological Seminary and said, what does that word that's translated nigh in the King James Version mean? He says it means certain. It has nothing to do with time, which fits the context. The plant's it's going to get there. It's just going to take time. And so none of the passages actually say that he's coming really soon. It just gives us, Jesus is answering the disciples. He's telling them, yes, these are the signs to look for. So this is what we're looking at, is some of the signs tonight. And one of the signs is the Battle of Gog and Magog. Ezekiel 38 through 39:16. Now there's 2 battles going on. One is the Battle of Gog and Magog, which has to occur before the tribulation starts. And the other is the Battle of Armageddon, which happens at the end of the tribulation. And they're both in that same passage. And it goes through 39:16. 39:17 on to the rest of the chapter is dealing, I believe, with the Battle of Armageddon. One consists of certain nations, mainly the Middle Eastern nations that come against Israel. The last Armageddon consists of everybody, all the nations of the world.
What
So,
is eminence?
eminent means at any moment. Imminent, actually, it's with an I. I-M-M-I. So anyway, here is a picture of, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a pretty good picture of the end times. And we see during the church age, you have World War I and World War II. Well, in Isaiah 66, it talks about the birth pains. Can a nation be born in a day? I asked Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who is that woman that's giving birth?
No. Oh, yeah.
He says Israel.
I thought it was a chord.
And the celestials?
Israel, well, basically the child, the baby that's born, basically is the nation of Israel. But the woman giving birth is actually kind of a picture of Israel as well. So it gives a birth to, can a nation be born in a day? So what's being born is the nation of Israel. And it is pretty much born in a day, May 14th, 1948. And yet Israel was scattered throughout the world. And so God brings them back, and again with the Balfour Declaration. So World War I prepared the land for Israel because the Balfour Declaration gave them permission to return to Israel, whereas none of the Roman emperors would allow Israel to return. They tried to return back in 338 AD, and the emperor at that time kicked them out, renamed the place after himself, and didn't want Israel to ever come back. And so Israel was without a home for almost 2,000 years. And Hosea 5:14 through chapter 6, it talks about the Lord. He says, I will go away in 2 days, and the third day I will return. And that has 3 fulfillments. One is that the nation of Israel was basically without, for 2,000 years was not a nation. And the third nation, the third day, a day is with the Lord is 1,000 years. Jesus was in the grave for 2 days, and the third day he arose. So there's 3 fulfillments of that one passage. The third fulfillment is the last 3 days of the tribulation, the nation of Israel recognizes their Messiah and repents and returns to him, and quite probably quotes the passage in Isaiah 53. They saw him, they didn't recognize who he was. So now they do. And part of the recognizing of who Israel, of Jesus, is this battle of Gog and Magog. Because all of a sudden, God comes to their aid, and it's absolutely coming from God. Now, they don't know that that God is Jesus yet, but they knew that God is protecting them. Now, what happens in the battle of Gog and Magog is all these nations come against Israel, and so poor Israel is just a little speck, the size of New Jersey, compared to all these huge nations that are coming against them. And yet Israel, right now, today, is the 4th most powerful nation on earth, right behind Russia, China, and the United States. That's because of their ability to design weapons and to be able to use them. And I used to work for McDonnell Douglas. I used to design a fighter F-4 for the Israeli people. And then we worked on the F-15, and Israel got our best weapons. So the Battle of Gog and Magog. Now, a lot of people in Thessalonica thought that they might have been in the tribulation. And you see this in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3, and it talks about they think they might be in the tribulation. Paul had just left the Thessalonians 6 months before that. In fact, he got kicked out by the Jews. So the Thessalonians, brand new baby Christians, they think there's a book out circulating, one of the pseudepigrapha books that has Paul's name on it and says, are we in the tribulation? And Paul says, no, you're not in the tribulation. That time will not come until there be apostasy, apostasia, first. Well, what does the word apostasy mean? It means to depart. But most people interpret that as departing from the earth, departing from the faith. But in reality, that passage most likely means departing from the earth. Now, somebody at the prophecy conference I go to at Dallas, it's like this is for the guys that are teaching prophecy all over seminaries like Grace Seminary, Dallas Seminary, all of the leading professors, Lewis Berry Schaefer Seminary. A good friend of mine, Andy Woods, is the president of that one. He's got most of my syllabi. We get there, discuss things, and I say, you can't believe in imminence. It doesn't work. And so we have these he's a super nice guy. He's about 6'8" or 6'9". I say, you're one of the last of the Nephilim. But anyway, he came up with a really good one this last December, and basically he shows that has to mean the departure from the earth. But one guy came up there, and I knew somebody was going to do this. I almost did. He says, okay, what it's saying is that the rapture is not going to happen until the rapture happens. Because if you look at verse 1, it says, when Christ will come and gather us to himself, that day will not come until there's an apostasy. In other words, the rapture happens. But in reality, that's probably what it means. In other words, you guys are not in the tribulation, because that tribulation, you're still here. So if the tribulation, if you were in it, you wouldn't be here. And there's also the fact that Paul talked about, he used a definite article in there. He says, the apostasy. Well, what did he talk about in 1 Thessalonians? He talked about a departure from the earth, 1 Thessalonians 4. So he was not talking about a departure from the faith. In fact, he didn't even mention departure from the faith until later on in his ministry. And so he's referring to something that he had referred to before, and all he talked about before was the departure, the rapture itself. So anyway, we're going to talk about Gog and Magog. Russia is expanding its military footprint in Libya and Sudan, using the Maitan El Saraf air base and others to bolster its presence in Africa. In Libya, Russia uses air bases like the Al-Qadim for logistics, while in Sudan, he's finalized deal for the 25-year Russian naval base near Port Sudan in exchange for arms. No evidence in air bases in Ethiopia yet. But so this is what the idea Tarshish, could mean Spain, but a lot of people think it means England. And that's good. There's a good argument for meaning in England. Whatever it was, Jonah was going to Tarshish. We don't know where that was, but it was supposed to take him about 2 years round trip. And so that probably wasn't Spain. It probably was England that he was going to. But I always say that he comes in. Now, he had a fast camel. He could have made it in about 4 days from the shore where he was dropped off. But he comes walking in, and his clothes are half digested by the acids in the whale's belly. His skin is bleached clear white. He's got a piece of seaweed sticking out his left ear, and he says, "Repent." Now, what would you do? I'd repent. Anyway, so this whole idea is this. So we see Gomer is sometimes referred to as Germany. A lot of these names are actually part of Turkey. So we're not really sure where they are exactly. Rosh, many people think, is Russia. Gog would be Putin right now at this time. And right now he is putting on an extreme amount of persecution of Christians right now as we speak. So Putin is right now, yeah.
I thought he was Catholic.
Well, he's probably nothing, but communists in general do not have God because the state becomes God. So whatever he might have been originally is not what he is today.
So what is he doing?
He's persecuting Christians.
By
How is he doing it? I'm not exactly sure. I was watching this on YouTube, something that's just happened. He's doing this. So anyway, there's a question. See, we all believed that everything was going forth, and the head of this organization, the World Economic Forum, said if Trump gets elected, we're toast. And everything was in place. It all looked like it was going to happen. And then Trump gets elected. And now the Supreme Court is allowing him to get rid of all of the appointees that Biden put. About 80 of those guys are part of the deep state. And the Supreme Court has given him the power to fire anybody without necessarily having a reason. So he can clean up the deep state, which is good. So did Trump? This is a good question. Did Trump stop Gog and Magog war, or did he postpone it? Maybe. And so here it is, a picture of the Gog and Magog war, and of course, there's one of your buddies. He came and spoke at the pre-trib rapture study group a couple years ago, and about every other sentence he had somewhere in the idea of imminence, that Christ was going to come back at any moment. And I'm saying I don't think that can happen. Now the only way, I debated their leader Tommy Ice 2 years ago on this very subject, and I said, you can't have imminence because there's nowhere to, if you have things that have to happen before Christ can come back. Well, what he does, and what they all do now, is they put a gap between the rapture and the tribulation. They stuff the battle of Gog and Magog, the overflowing scourge, and all that stuff in that gap. But I say, according to Luke 17, he's talking about his return. He's saying they're going to be eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and building and planning. Well, they're not going to be building and planning much of anything at the end of the tribulation. They're going to be dodging 100-pound hailstones. They're not going to be marrying and giving marriage, 7 women clinging to 1 man. You know, that's not life as normal. So it has to be at the beginning of the tribulation. But he says the day that Lot fled from Sodom, the judgment came. Not the day after, but the day. The day that Noah entered the ark, the flood came. Now, if the flood is a picture of the tribulation, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is a picture of the tribulation, which it looks like it is, okay, then there's no gap. And that's what David L. Cooper said. If that's a literal 24-hour day, then there is no gap. Now, I'm willing to admit that maybe that day is like the day of Jehovah or the day of George Washington. It could be used as a more general term. And if we do that, then maybe we can give them some grace and say, okay, maybe there'll be a little time between the rapture and the tribulation. But it looks like, to me, according to that class, it's the very day, not the day after. So if that's true, then there probably is no gap. Again, you can see any questions about this layout here. You see the Bema Seat judgment is done somewhere, sometime in the air, or maybe you're given your rewards the moment you die. That's a possibility as well. It's kind of like when I graduated from the University of Minnesota, and I looked at this thousands of people. I was in mechanical engineering at the time, and we were all waiting, and then Malcolm Moose was the president of University of Minnesota, and the clouds just opened up and started pouring, and he said, "Just get out of here." I suspect that we're not going to be waiting in line to watch everybody get their rewards. So here's a picture. Some people would like to say that this is what's going to happen to Israel. Everything is going to attack. All of these are Muslim nations, and Russia is actually a very good portion of it is Islamic, especially in the south. Gomer is becoming more and more Islamic, Germany, but I think those nations, most of those have titles or names similar to that in what is now Turkey. So Put, Libya, Kush, those are all accurate. Iran is accurate. And so people are asking, if Iran has no weapons, if Iran has no army, no navy, no anything, how are they going to participate in the battle of Gog and Magog? Right now, all of their money is being used to encourage other countries to attack Israel. So who knows? But I think what can happen, things can turn around rather quickly. This is a chart showing that the invasion has to happen at least 3.5 years before the rapture. Why? Because they're burning the weapons for 7 years. Now, they're not going to be, and where are they going to be burning the weapons? They're burning them in the nation of Israel. So, and it's using weapons of that day. And I'm saying, okay, Russia makes a tank that's out of hardened wood. It's actually stronger than steel, but it burns quite good. So they could be burning Russian tanks. But how many tanks are you going to have to burn in order to supply all of the energy needs for the nation of Israel for 7 years? I calculated the amount of coal that they would burn in one day back in 2002, and there's not enough weapons in the world to last 7 years in Israel. So the only thing I can think of is that there's tactical nuclear weapons that Russia uses a lot. In fact, they have the largest tactical nuclear weapons in the stockpile in the world. And right now in the Black Sea, there are a couple of submarines that they're using to power some small cities using their nuclear reactors. So I could see, if it was a nuclear weapon, how it could last 7 years. I mean, a nuclear fuel or something like that. But the last 3.5 years, they're most likely going to be in Petra. They're not going to be in the nation. They're not going to be in Jerusalem at all, or in Israel. So, anyway, so what we have is Satan is right there in the middle. You see him, and he's setting himself up in the temple. This is the tribulation temple. And at the time he does that, he is basically breaking his covenant with Israel, and the Israelites have to flee. So they flee to a place that God has provided for them. And we see that in Revelation 12:16. And the woman, that's Israel, fled into the wilderness where she hath a place prepared of God that they may nourish her basically 3.5 years. Somebody realized that Israel was going to be going in that to Petra, or at least that's where they thought it. So they were putting all kinds of Bible tracts all over what is the ancient city of Petra. Now, Petra was actually blown apart through earthquakes. But it's interesting that that's the place, if Muhammad ever existed, and there's question whether to believe that Muhammad ever was a real person. And that's, Jay Smith has made that, he probably knows more about Islam than any human being alive, and he really questions whether Muhammad lived. At least the Muhammad that is portrayed in the Hadith. Because the Muhammad in the Hadith lived in Mecca for 52 years. Mecca was not a city for over 100 years after Muhammad died. It was nothing but desert wasteland. There was no city there at all. Why? Because there was no water there. There was no plants. There was nothing that describes what supposedly Muhammad was living in for the first 52 years of his life. And all of the Qiblas they weren't facing Mecca for over 120 years till after Muhammad died. The Qibla is the wall that they face when they pray. Why do they face a certain direction? Because Arab culture, they had a god for every city. So as you went through that city, you would give reverence or some kind of, obeisance to that particular god if you wanted to, preserve yourself, not get killed. But anyway, that's why they had all of these gods in the Kaaba, different gods from all over the country. So now we see that Mecca is supposedly the place where their prophet exists, so now we need to put our bow towards Mecca, which is their God, basically, is represented by their prophet, Muhammad, but he didn't live in Mecca. In fact, they found that the Qiblas in India and China were all facing Petra. And if you take this, they actually have done, they show all of the Qiblas and they all intersect Petra. And there was a Quraysh tribe 27 miles south of Petra. So Muhammad may have lived in Petra instead of Mecca, if he lived at all. Anyway, so there's a picture of this, and then we're going to come to Magog's coming, invasion of Israel, and we can see this. So there's two invasions, one before and one after the tribulation. And these are some of may not be accurate, but these are the cities that a lot of people associate with those names. And so then these are the things that are happening. And then we have, here's a picture of Israel, tiny Israel compared to the rest of it. And then there's the Western powers. And we see it talks about the merchants of Tarshish and all the young lions. The young lions would be the ones who basically were born as a result of Tarshish. If Tarshish is Britain, then that would be U.S. and Canada. And so what do the young lions say? Well, they say, have you come to take a spoil? Now, why would the United States not come to rescue Israel if it's being attacked by all these Muslim nations? Well, today, if Trump was in charge, I'm sure he would probably try to protect Israel. However, he's got some people around him, Johnson for one, who's a born-again Christian, who may be telling him, hey, this is the battle of Gog and Magog. Just wait and see what happens. So somebody that knows and sees this as basically what it really is, he said, let God do it. So that may be the reason he says, have you come to take a spoil? I don't know. It sounds like I don't know anything when you listen to me talk about this stuff. But the question is, I don't think anybody knows exactly. These are some of the things that are going to happen to those nations that when they do attack Israel, there's going to be earthquakes, pestilence, plagues, bloodshed, overflowing showers, rains, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. And this is all listed in that Ezekiel 38 through 39:16 portion. We won't read it.
David?
Yeah.
Do you think that the fire and brimstones coming down will just be on the invading army, or will that be the nations themselves?
Both.
Okay.
It says both, because not only does God actually judge the armies and kill them, and they're going to be buried there in Israel. And first of all, the birds of prey take a feast on them, but then later on they bury them all, and it takes 7 months to bury all the dead. This is in Ezekiel 38. So they're burying the dead, but then in the passage from 39:16 on, they're not burying anybody. It's left up to the birds of prey to finish off the job. So it's two different battles, I believe. And it's interesting because those birds of prey, the Israelites used to poison them. But now the farmers are setting up refuges for these birds. They used to just fly over Israel. Now they're having families in Israel. So there's been a lot of birds of prey are starting to multiply. So maybe they're getting ready for a feast. Who knows? But this passage here kind of locates that. See, I always thought, I was arguing with Doc Bishore, I said, couldn't they take those weapons and bring them to Petra and burn them there? But if you read the passage, and that's why I say it does not say those who used to dwell in Israel. It says those who dwell in Israel, they're burning the weapons there in Israel. And they're not even going to be in Israel during the last 3.5 years, which means that this has to start at least 3.5 years before the start of the tribulation. 5 reasons for believing that the invasions will take place before the tribulations. This is going to be in your notes, but you don't have your notes yet because I went to the printer and he hadn't printed anything today. He always waits till 5 o'clock. You know, I come there usually at 5 o'clock and he's got them then. But I came today at about 2:30 and he hadn't done them yet. So I said, I'm so glad you didn't print them because I've added so much material that I'm going to add to the syllabus. So it's great. This is a divine appointment. I'm glad that you didn't do it. So next week, if you come back next week, I will have part 1 with all the new notes in it. Pastor Ron, he always, are you sure you're done? You know, I don't want to buy this syllabus if you're going to add a bunch of stuff to it. So, and he's right, I keep adding stuff. So the Western powers and basically the nations, and it also talks and about the isles. Now, where are the Muslims living today? Only 15% of the Muslims are Arabic speaking, live in the Middle East. There are 200 million Muslims in almost 200 in Bangladesh. There's over 200 million in Pakistan. There's 240 million in Indonesia, and there's about 200 million in northern India. And as a matter of fact, I used to talk about this in northern India near the Himalayas. There's a tribe, it was the Hamar tribe. They were the worst headhunters in the world. In fact, they had a reputation, and England was kind of proud of the fact that they owned territory with the worst headhunting group in the world. I mean, they were kind of bragging about having that, you know, it's kind of like some kind of a trophy for them. But this guy out of the Welsh revival, a guy named, he read about this. He got saved during the Welsh revival in 1904. And 1906, he actually sent a gospel tract to this Hamar tribe. They didn't even have a written language. All they had was they could speak to each other, but they didn't have anything written down. But somebody got a hold of it that spoke that language, and they mailed back to him, said, please come and explain. So to him, that was a call from God. And so he went down, got on a boat, went all the way up, got 2 fellows to take him into this headhunting tribe. Nobody goes in there alone. You basically will become one of their victims. But he went in there to preach the gospel, and he preached for a little over a week before the British got him out of there. And he thought he was a failure as a missionary. His name was Watkin Roberts. Years later, he's up in Canada. And the son of the leader that got saved as a result of Watkin Roberts' preaching ended up becoming the pastor of the tribe. And the other guy that followed him, the British took him out. He had to wait for his boat, so these 2 guys got discipled by Watkin Roberts, but he thought he was a failure as missionary. Years later, he's here studying at Wheaton College, and there's a letter sent to Wheaton. Is somebody from India studying at this college? And he says, yeah. And he found out that was Watkin Roberts. He knew from his father. That's the guy that actually came, and he had translated the entire New Testament into the language of his people. Now, these people didn't have a language, so he had to use Tagnemics and other in order to make the language and then to translate the entire thing while he was working to support himself through Wheaton and then falling asleep in his classes. But he ended up getting a train. He sent it over to Britain to get printed to sent back to India. And then he got on a train and went up, and he found the place where that letter was. He could talk to Watkin Roberts, an old man coming up the stairs. He says, what can I do to help you? He says, I'm Chunga's son. And as a result, he said, your name is written on every leaf in the forest. It turns out, I've got a picture of it, but it shows India is at less than 1% Christian, except in that northeastern portion surrounding the Himalayas where the Hamar tribe is, it's 50% or more Christian. It's amazing. God takes the worst of the worst and uses them for his glory. And so I got a picture showing that. It's amazing. I didn't even know that until I started looking at it. And, some headhunter comes up to you and says, you better get saved. I said, okay. Anyway, so here's, again, some more pictures. This is a guy which had a great ministry trying to show people that Islam is nothing to be, you need to pay attention to these people. This is John Guandalo. He did an excellent job. He has a ministry called Understanding the Threat. This is happening all over. To be clear, all the prominent Islamic organizations in the United States are part of a well-organized, coordinated effort to undermine America's founding principles, Constitution, laws, civil society, with the stated objective of imposing Sharia Islamic law on every American while establishing an Islamic caliphate here. The purpose of Islam, as stated in all textbooks for 11-year-olds in the U.S. Islamic schools, is to wage war against non-Muslims until the entire world submits to Allah's divine law, or Sharia. No book of Islamic law or textbook used by Muslims to teach Islam to Muslims in any country, in any century, says anything different. So, Islam teaches a mosque is the seat of Islamic government where battles are planned, jihadis trained, and weapons stored. Why do Muslims attack people with knives, cars, planes, vest bombs, and anything else they can get their hands on? According to the Quran, Islam's prophet Muhammad is the most perfect human being for all Muslims for all time, and he commanded Muslims to fight the non-Muslims with all means possible. Islam wages war on America and the rest of the non-Muslim world because Islam commands it until the world is under Islamic law. And you've got the people who are not necessarily terrorists, but they're Muslims. But the problem is they're part of the house of war if they're not really militant. So if you're not a militant Muslim, you may be the one of the victims that they attack because you're not one of them. You're not part of the house of war or the house of Islam. You're part of the house of war. The house of Islam is just the military one, just the militant ones. And so the militant ones have everybody else afraid because they have no hesitation to just kill you. So Muslims are purchasing hotels, Quick Marts, 7-Eleven stores, gas stations. You know how many mosques they have down in Texas? I can't remember the number, but it's huge.
330.
Is it 330?
34.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what's happening. This is happening all over this country. And then a lot of people they've come to me. In fact, I had to debate these guys. These people are pro-Palestinians. They're not Palestinian they're basically white Americans, but they've been trained and they've been taught that the Palestinians are the good people and the Israelis are the bad people. The Israeli people are just trying to defend themselves, and Benjamin Netanyahu in his UN speech said this quite well. I think it's worth reading. And tomorrow, UN Security Council sanctions on Iran must be snapped back. Thanks to the resolve of our people, the courage of our soldiers, and our bold decisions we took, Israel rebounded from its darkest day to deliver one of the most stunning military comebacks in history. The final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities on October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job, and this is why we must do it as fast as possible. And this is what I debated these people on October 7th. They chose the date. But they look at it as a date for, the Hamas. They're the good people. The Hamas carried out the worst attack on Jews. Yeah.
Was that the one in Laguna that
Yeah.
you did?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. I didn't remember that was October 7th.
Yeah, that was October 7th. And every time this guy, who's Roman Catholic, I don't think he knew a Christian from a wall, but every time he said something, no matter how stupid it was, these guys would pound the table, clap their hands and say, oh, what a wonderful statement that was,
David,
Yeah.
New York has 340 mosques, and our California state comes in second. We have 300 mosques. Here,
Yeah.
300. We have 300.
Wow.
Just 40 less than New York. Just 40 less mosques than New York. We come in second with the most mosques
Yeah.
in the whole country.
By the way, this coming
California, our California state.
September 11th, 12th, and 13th, that's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there is the Ministry to Muslims Conference, and they do this because of October 11th, or September 11th, I mean, yeah, the 9/11. They have this conference every year, and it's at a Calvary Chapel, so if you're interested, you would like information about that, actually, this next Thursday on the 10th, Jay Smith is going to be speaking, and he's worth listening to. If you want to listen to somebody that really knows what's happening, look up Jay Smith on the internet.
It's not the 10th.
Yeah, you have to register for it.
Yeah.
The thing is,
Well, you can find him on the internet. Just look up Jay Smith, Islam.
September 10th, yeah.
He really does an excellent job of exposing it. In fact, he started learning it. He lived in North India, and so he was raised with Muslims. In fact, they were his high school buddies, and he would argue with them day and night. And after he finally got out of there and graduated from college, he was through with Islam. But then he realized the number of ministers or missionaries to Islam is very small. In fact, extremely small. And so he told his wife, he said, "We just got our mission from God. we need to minister to Muslims." And of course, he was most qualified because he'd been doing this all of his life already. But the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat it over and over as many times as they need to. They slaughtered 1,200 innocent people, including 400 Americans and foreign nationals from dozens of countries represented. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burned babies alive, they burned babies alive in front of their parents. What monsters. These monsters took more than 250 people hostage. Those included Holocaust survivors, grandmothers and their children. Who takes hostage grandmothers and children? Hamas does. So far, we brought home 207 of these hostages, but 48 still remain in dungeons of Gaza. Of them alive, starved, tortured, deprived of any daylight, deprived of humanity. The head of urban warfare studies, Colonel John Spencer, he's probably the world's expert on urban warfare, says Israel is applying more measures to minimize civilian casualties than any military in history. For 3 weeks, Israel dropped millions of leaflets, sent millions of text messages, and made countless phone calls urging civilians to leave Gaza City before the military moves in. At the same time, Hamas implants itself in mosques, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, and tries to force these civilians not to leave, to stay in harm's way, often threatens them at gunpoint if they try to do so. For Israel, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy. Hamas uses civilians as human shields and as props in its sick propaganda war against Israel, a propaganda war that the Western media buys book, line, and sinker. Despite Hamas's threats, close to 700,000 Gazans, almost 750,000, have already heeded our calls and moved to safe zones. Israel is accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza when Israel is deliberately feeding the people of Gaza. Since the beginning of the war, Israel has let into Gaza more than 2 million tons of food and aid. If the Gazans don't have enough food, it's because Hamas is steals it, hoards it, and sells it at exorbitant prices to fund their war machine. And then, when I was debating atheists, I used to debate them once a month for 2 years. They would always bring up this idea that Israel killed the Canaanites. What a murderous people Israel is. But to realize that the Canaanites, for 400 years, they knew Egypt is not that far away. They knew what was happening. They knew about the Israelites. And for 400 years, they had a chance to repent. If they had repented, there would have been no deaths. But this is a standard procedure for battling a city, was first to extend terms of peace. If the terms were accepted, the people of that city lived and became subservient to Israel. If the terms were rejected, the city was besieged and the men were killed, but the women and children were spared. Attacking the city within Canaan called for different rules and represented an exception to this standard. The wars sanctioned by God beyond the time of Joshua were defensive in nature. So it was just this one time when they came in to possess the land where they were told to kill every man, woman, and child. But the problem was that those people did not want to repent. They had a chance to. For 400 years they could have. And they decided to basically fight against Israel, fight against God. The number of battles that Israel fought on the way to and within Canaan were also defensive in nature. to judge the Canaanites for their abominations. This is the reason God commanded the genocide of the Canaanites. For Leviticus 18 provides a list of sins that Israel was to avoid at all costs: incense, child sacrifice, homosexuality, bestiality. All these sins were practiced by the people of Canaan. God had given the Canaanite people over 400 years to repent, Genesis 15, 13 through 16. The Canaanites knew what was coming and had heard God's awesome power, Joshua 2. Such awareness should have prompted their repentance, but as they remained resistant to God, so to stave off idolatry and compromise to prevent future problems to fulfill the curse on Gaden. Well, the problem was that Israel did not kill off all of them, and as a result, they adopted many of their practices. They started worshiping Moabite. They started worshiping the gods of the Canaanites, unfortunately. So God knew what to do, but they just didn't do it. And so anyway, we're back to prophecy again. The first conversion of Israel and the Gentiles. Israel is converted first for a time. Several are converted at this battle of Gog and Magog. And another thing, that just before the tribulation, we'll see the appearing of Elijah, turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. We have the rebuilding of the tribulation temple, and we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but the temple has to be in place. Now here is the one world government, and it's given in Daniel 7:23. And once Russia and its allies are destroyed, that's the battle of Gog and Magog, the nations of the world will establish a world government. He said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it into pieces. Daniel 7:23. That's the one world government. Daniel prophesied that there would be a world government in the end times. The whole earth, the final kingdom will be like that, the world kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar. God gave him rule over the entire world, though he did not rule over everyone on earth. He was given the entire world to rule over. The final world government will not only be given the power, but it will actually rule over everyone. And it must be established before the tribulation, because it will break into 10 pieces. That's the next verse. And then the man of sin, the Antichrist, will appear. So this is the First and Second Amendments to the Constitution of the United States are under attack. This is the right to religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly. We have been given the right to keep and bear arms. The government can't take these away from us because it's part of our Constitution. Big business can do it. And that's what the World Economic Forum is all about.
David,
Yeah.
do you think that the Gog and Magog war could be possibly a triggering event to set the Antichrist up? That you're going to have a financial collapse of the whole world, and who's going to have a solution to it? Does that make any sense?
Well, there is a book out called we're going to look at that when we get to Revelation, but its wars were designed to steal money from people. And that's what happened when we had in 1913, we set up the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was actually owned by businessmen, and what they would do is they would loan money to the United States to build weapons so we could fight this enemy. But they needed an enemy that was substantial enough for us to need to buy weapons for. So that's why they basically turned Russia over to the communists. They sent Trotsky over with $20 million of gold. They wanted to establish China and Russia as threats so that we would have to build up our military in order to defend ourselves. And as a result, we owed nobody any money in 1913, and when this was set up. We were debt-free. And then all of a sudden, now we are in battles, World War I, World War II, and we're borrowing money at interest from the Federal Reserve. So what was used to be worth $1 is now worth a penny. So that's a tax.
38 trillion in debt.
Yeah,
Now it's up to 40 trillion as announced today.
Really? 40 trillion
Yeah,
today.
it's 40.
Yeah.
Our
Wasn't
nation is
wasn't
40
this the
trillion in
third,
debt.
second or third time that,
Wow.
that's created that Federal Reserve or independent bank system?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
this
under Andrew Jackson, right? He got
this War is a Racket. That was the name of the book I was going to tell you. It tells how much it required to kill a person back in the early days, and now how much it takes to kill a person in today. It's like in hundreds of millions of dollars just to kill one person. So I've got all that written down. I'll show it, share it with you later. But it's amazing
How much? $100 million?
to kill one person. Yeah.
I don't understand that. I guess I'm stupid.
Legal costs.
Yeah, well, I'll share it with you later, but I'm going to come to that book, and when I get to the book, I'll show you. It has the numbers exactly. It seemed unreasonable to me too. The United Nations adopted groundbreaking pact for the future. This is why Trump comes up with his peace plan as opposed to the United Nations, because the United Nations is crazy. I have a book that was written. Everything about the United Nations is designed to set up a one world government.
destroyed the U.S.
And so this is what their pact for the future, to transform to a global governance, to connect all people, schools, and hospitals to the internet, to anchor digital cooperation and human rights and international law. And of course, they will have an international criminal court, so you can be judged by them instead of our own courts. Now, where did all this begin? Well, it all started back with a guy named John Ruskin. He was given a lecture at Oxford, and Quigley was one of the students. Cecil Rhodes was one of the students. Quigley was writing about it, and this is what's in his book. But Quigley traces the origin of socialism's influence on banking elite to the arrival of Professor John Ruskin at Oxford in 1870. Cecil Rhodes, an enthusiastic student of John Ruskin, works to bring all the habitable portions of the world under the domination of a ruling elite. To that end, he uses a portion of his vast wealth to establish the famous Rhodes Scholarships. What Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner had in mind was the formation of a master-slave society based upon the principles of eugenics as derived from Plato's Republic. Malthusian eugenics is philosophy of depopulation through the reduction of inferior races, human weeds, and the selective breeding of a race of thoroughbreds, as described early in the century by Rockefeller-funded Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger. When Thomas Malthus's theory of population was later coupled with Charles Darwin's evolutionary model, the result was known as social Darwinism. How Cecil Rhodes fathered the modern globalistic movement, driven by some wealthiest people of all time, a totalitarian one-world government by an elite administered by a corporate-owned United Nations with the help of corporate-owned NGOs, national non-governmental organizations, appears unstoppable. The modern project for global governance by the elite goes back to Cecil Rhodes. The secret societies to rule the world. In 1877, Cecil Rhodes writes at the age of 22 in Confession of Faith, "Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule, for the recovery of the United States from making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire." In 1887, Nathaniel Rothschild financed the establishment of the Beer Mining Company, basically which got all of this money. Rhodesia was owned by Rhodes, basically, and he had the diamond mines, the gold mines. He took this vast wealth to establish this organization called this, he didn't have a name for it, but out of that organization sprung Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, all of these other organizations were all based upon a one-world government. In 1891, Cecil Rhodes, William Stead, Lords Esher, Rothschilds, Salisbury, Rosebery, and Milner drew up a plan for a secret society, the Round Table, that aims to bring all habitable portions of the world under their influence and control. Cecil Rhodes' Round Table led to the founding in 1921 of both the U.S.-based Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, and the Chatham House in London. Bilderberg, founded in 1954, the Club of Rome in 1968, the Trilateral Commission in 1973, All these organizations are dedicated to global governments, and there is an extensive overlap in terms of their principal players. The same forces created the United Nations. And we could go on. I've got details. The United Nations has always been intended to be the mechanism by which global governments by wealthy elite will be achieved. And there's some of the guys: Cecil Rhodes, Nathan Rothschild, William Stead. William Stead was interesting. He was actually killed in the Titanic. But how Cecil Rhodes fathered the modern globalist movement, and basically, this is the round table. Now you see all of these groups. They really didn't give it a name. They just called it the round table, but it didn't have a name. They didn't want people to know much about it. And Milner wrote a book called Constructive Imperialism, which basically details all of that. Yeah.
I think that round table also is heavily invested in a lot of pizza places.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why some of those?
But it's healthy.
Oh, sorry. Why some of those people are Jews?
Some of them are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Jews seem to rise to places of prominence no matter where they're at.
Right.
And some for good, some for bad.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
So we've got.
I just want to make a point.
Yeah.
I know.
A lot of the people,
Yeah.
they'll find a Jew
Yeah.
that they don't like, and they'll make all Jews, be responsible for all his evil deeds. When in reality, he's just a person, just happens to be a Jew,
Right.
but he's not any more Jewish than who's our leader? Probably the worst one of the bunch.
Schumer. Chuck Schumer.
No,
Yeah, Soros.
Soros, yeah, George Soros. Yeah, Soros basically, to call him Jewish, well,
Yeah.
I mean, he may have been born a Jew, but he's no more Jewish than, as far as beliefs are concerned. He's a Marxist.
Yeah, I just wanted to put that into perspective because I just wanted,
So, anyway, this gives you a little bit of picture. Yeah, go ahead.
Where do you think China's going to fit in with all of this? Because most of these people are all Caucasians. I had to go to UCI today for a medical appointment, and everybody there was Asian.
Uh-huh.
They're all Chinese. And of course, then, you got 1.5 billion Chinese over there getting ready to threaten to attack Taiwan, nuclear power. Is something going to happen to them? Are they going to fall financially?
Military is aging.
Well, they can't compete with our F-47. They've got a weapon, they've got a plane, but it's not anywhere near what ours is.
but they steal our technologies.
Yeah, that's what they do. They steal our technology.
Our technologies.
Yeah, and in fact, they found out it's a lot cheaper to bribe congressmen and senators than it is to declare war. So they can buy the Democrats, and the Democrats are kind of socialists. They're communists anyway, and they have to be because John Sweeney took over the AFL-CIO, and he stole that election. But basically, he was a Marxist. So he's ahead of the union, and in order to get on the Democratic ticket, you have to get the support of the unions, or you'll never get on. Now that the communist is in charge of the main union, which is an umbrella over about, 50 other unions. In fact, I showed that whole pattern. This is so powerful. In fact, the teachers' union is even more liberal than this union. 99.6% of the people that supported Hillary Clinton, or the money that comes from the teachers' union, went to Hillary Clinton, not to Trump. So they were the most liberal, but the other unions were very liberal, but the unions were designed originally to protect the workers. But as soon as the communists got in charge, the workers are no longer important. The only thing important is their agenda. And so if a Democrat doesn't vote for what is on the communist plan, then he's not going to get elected by the unions anymore. So that's why they vote as a block. They won't see one of them.
Does that make the block?
Yeah, that's good. But just that's one of the problems. Now, the agenda of the New Age is very similar. In fact, New World Order, Universal Credit Card System, World Food Authority, World Health Authority, World Water Authority, Universal Tax, Universal Military Draft, abolishing Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And here's the 1914 Nicholas Murray Butler, president of Columbia University, said, "The time will come when each nation will deposit in a world federation some portion of its sovereignty for the general good. When this happens, it will be possible to establish an international executive and international police, both devised for the special purpose of enforcing the decision of the International Court." Can you imagine an international ICC, an International Criminal Court, coming in and deciding? Running by criminals, yeah. So if you worship the Lord, you know that's a crime. In fact, of all of the list, evangelical Christians are on the top of the list of offenders. Birth of the World Federalist Organizations, World Government Committees in America and Europe, we recognize the ultimate solution of such world problems as these calls for an organized world government that comes from the Federal Council of Churches. The General Assembly of North Carolina solemnly declared that all peoples of the earth shall now be united in a commonwealth of nations to be known as the Federation of the Earth. All our delegates of the United Nations organization be directed toward the ultimate goal of establishing a world republic. So this is one of the this fellow was from Canada. He came and he spoke at our pre-trib rapture study group. I thought his was the best talk I'd heard anybody give. And he started off with this one world, one oneness. And basically he goes to all of these events like Burning Man, and they have others, and they're outdoor things, but they are sometimes they'll put out the tickets and they're sold out within minutes. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. Well, they're outside, but this is what happens. And so he has pictures of all this stuff. He goes to all of these. I want to go to Burning Man sometime. Anyway.
It's changed.
Yeah, I fit right in.
It's crazy.
The
No, he said he wants to go. It's such a
I have
joke.
friends that go.
The creation of an alternative, authoritative, all-powerful world order is the ultimate aim towards which we must strive. Unless some effective world supergovernment can set up and brought quickly into action, the prospects for peace and human progress are dark and doubtful. Winston Churchill.
Power corrupts, and absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Now, this is the World Parliament of Religions. I went to this. I went to their 100th anniversary in Chicago. They had this 100 years ago in Chicago. And in their statement, they said, the religion of the future will be a universal in every sense. It will embody all the thoughts and aspirations and virtues and motions of all humanity. It will draw together all lands and peoples and kindreds and tongues into a universal brotherhood of love and service. It will establish upon the earth a heavenly order. So I went to this one, and basically it was in Chicago. This was in 1993, and I was with some cult researchers. We were staying there, and I walked out on a Thursday morning, and this the atheist group were pounding on a shaman's drum, singing, "We are one with the soul of the earth." So I followed them all the way down into their meeting. But this is basically where we're coming from. Everybody, they're worshiping, well, themselves, actually.
David, do you think that'll ultimately be the Catholic Church?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because that's why the Catholic person, basically, John Huss was up in Bohemia saying that the Catholic Church is probably the harlot in Revelation 17, and the Pope is probably the Antichrist. And so Alcazar basically came up with this idea, and he basically came up with preterism. Preterism says the entire book of Revelation is past. That's Latin for preterist. passed, that means that Nero would have been the Antichrist. I mean, I'm going through and looking at preterism, but that's what these people who teach replacement theology are talking about. They're preterists, and most of them are also dominionists. And we're going to see that basically the 20 million ultra-charismatics who are talking about the Word Faith group, they're almost all dominionists and preterists. So anyway, the World Parliament of Religion, what is a Muslim population of Rotterdam is 40%. What is the most popular baby's name in Belgium? Mohammed. In Amsterdam, Mohammed. In Malmo, Sweden, Mohammed. In Madrid, Spain, we have the largest mosque and the largest Mormon temple in Europe. Germany, Protestants are in rapid decline. Second largest religion is Islam. Third largest is Buddhism, while agnosticism, atheism, and paganism are growing rapidly. England, since 1969, 1,500 churches have closed. I was at a Baptist church in London when I was going to Oxford, and there were 6 people there. And it was huge.
Did you, wait, can you forward the slide?
What?
No, okay, wait, I don't know where you were talking from.
Oh, I wasn't talking. I have my own notes.
I see,
Okay.
Many are in his head, too.
Now, it's interesting that Ian Fleming was right in the midst of all of this, and he wrote all of the James Bond movies. Well, do you know where he got his ideas from? Milner, Stead, all these people. And it's interesting because Ian Fleming's knowledge of the deep state basically was, the truth behind his books. He had always had this one world government one person trying to establish this, and he looked a lot like Klaus Schwab, who was head of the World Economic Forum. The Great Reset of the World Economic Forum, in conjunction with the United Nations, there is a worldwide acceptance for a global economy. This global economy is tied to a one world government and a one world religion. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13, all 3 are mentioned. The authority of the Antichrist to establish one world government, Revelation 13, 1 through 5. The authority of the false prophet to establish a one world religion, Revelation 13, 6 through 15. The authority of the Antichrist and the false prophet to establish a one world economy, Revelation 13, 16 through 18. And then I show that Ernest Stavro Blofeld is a supervillain in James Bond series and novels and films, created by Ian Fleming, a criminal mastermind, and with aspirations of world domination. He is the arch enemy of British MI6 agent James Bond. Blofeld is head of the global criminal organization Spectre and is commonly referred to by the code name Number 1 within the organization. But I thought Klaus Schwab looked an awful lot like Blofeld.
I think he's number 2 because Donald Trump.
In fact, remember, if you see the movie Diamonds Are Forever, remember they took they were going to wipe out the entire human race, all of the human weeds, and they had all of these perfect Homo sapien white people that they were going to start over. Yeah. Huh? Oh, that's Moonraker, yeah. Yeah, that's right, you're right. Yeah. So, love of country, flag and country is being destroyed by our universities where students are taught to hate America. We're a racist nation. The capitalism has created greed, and that has pitted the poor against the rich. To be a patriot is seen as being chauvinistic, better than anyone else. This is why President Trump's America First theme was so unpopular with the leftist agenda. Furthermore, it flies in the face of present trend toward globalism. One can't see themselves as being citizens of the world if they see themselves as proud citizens of the United States of America. Therefore, if the agenda of the World Economic Forum is to be realized, destroying one's allegiance to the United States of America is critical. So we eliminate national borders. All this is done right in line with the agenda of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. When you lose your sovereignty, you're no longer a nation set apart with the rest of the world. Speakers of the World Economic Forum are Xi Jinping, President of China, who denied China as being origin of COVID-19, of course, Vladimir Putin, some of these people. And then you've got BlackRock, basically 9 trillion, and Vanguard 7 trillion, own 86% of the world's wealth. They want to set up a universal basic income, UBI, in conjunction with big government and world banks where all mortgages and debts are forgiven. Every citizen of the world is put on a set income. Finland was presently experiencing with UBI, but it didn't work. As Klaus Schwab said, you owe nothing, but you'll be happy.
David, could you back up 3 pictures about the rich greedy against the poor? It's like 3 back. The rich greedy against the poor. 7 lines down.
Well, we got to move
That's
on.
okay. That's okay. That's all right.
It's all in my notes. So we could illustrate the popularity of this through many world leaders, but Pope just called for a one world government. That's the last Pope Francis. He was a Marxist all the way from the beginning. Pope calls for a one world government. Pope Francis spoke of the need for all nations of the world to submit their governmental powers to a reformed and more powerful United Nations in hope of leading to a one world government to benefit all mankind. He noted that the time is right to make the move since globalized economic conditions in the 21st century have weakened the political power of the nation states. Pope tied together one world government with globalized economy. Jekyll Island in Georgia, you probably read the book that was written about Jekyll Island, but the Federal Reserve was the brainchild of Baron Alfred Rothschild of London. The final version of the act was decided on the secret meeting of Jekyll Island. They had the 7 or 8 richest people in the world met on this island owned by J.P. Morgan to hammer out this idea of this Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 brought about the killing of the U.S. Constitution, was the determining act of the international financiers in consolidating financial power in the United Nations. Pierre Jay, initiated into the Order of Skull and Bones in 1892, became the first chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Dozens of members of the Federal Reserve can be linked to the same order. So we're headed toward a cashless society, and so what will that look like? Revelation 13, basically, you get a mark of the beast. You can't buy or sell without the mark.
Do you think that the monetary coins right now, the Bitcoins,
Yeah.
are part of that?
It's going to be going towards that, yes.
Yes.
Cryptocurrency is basically the big thing. But
Digital currency.
Is that if the central bank issues they're the ones that will be.
yeah, the Swiss bank is basically the World Bank is going to be in charge of all of this, and these people own that. So there's a few people that are going to own the wealth of the world.
Total control.
Yeah.
It's better not to buy Bitcoins, right?
Well, you can profit from these things. You know, you don't have to believe the system to profit from them.
I don't believe in them. You can trade it.
Well, it depends if it's decentralized, so it's not like they can control them.
Right.
But the one that'll be by the the central bank, it'll be centralized, and that way they can track you and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference.
That's right.
Yeah, money is money. It doesn't matter the form, but yes, once they pretty much they use this as a mechanism to.
Lost money and it disappears out of the home.
So the false prophet rising out of the earth. These beasts are human beings who are satanically possessed. The false prophet is a deceitful character with 2 horns like a lamb, yet speaks like a dragon. He's the epitome of a wolf in sheep's clothing. He performs great signs and wonders, causes the earth to worship the first beast, the Antichrist. He creates the image of the first beast and demands that the whole world bow down and worship the image of the beast or be killed. It's not far-fetched with today's modern technology to believe that the image is a computerized with a state-of-the-art technology, AI stuff.
Could it be an AI instead of this? Or is it's gotta be human?
I think the beast itself will be some kind of an AI device. But the thing is, they can keep track of all of this stuff. through your cell phone.
Digital.
You're already doing that.
Yeah, they
I
are.
have a voice phone.
Through your television, through just about anything that's in your house, they can pretty much keep track of it.
Your car.
I'm using it as a witness. I witness to the television and stuff. You know, hopefully they'll get saved.
Yeah.
Then he causes all, both small and great, rich and free, to slave to receive the mark on the right hand of their forehead, that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the name of number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of man. Man number is 666. During the Great Tribulation, the world economy is totally controlled by an evil satanic dictator who has forced the world to take the mark on their right hand or forehead that is critical to their survival. Without the mark, they cannot purchase a single item. They cannot sell anything. And the thing is, if you take the mark, you're doomed. That's it. You're not going to heaven. It's Revelation 16. But the problem is the Seventh-day Adventists believe the mark of the beast is Sunday worship. The beast is Catholicism, but the mark of the beast is taking on some of the traits of the Catholicism, which is Sunday worship. So how are you going to get? How are you going to get these people saved if they take the mark of the beast? They worship on Sunday. They're not going to get saved according to Revelation 16, but that's because the Seventh-day Advent Church is clueless.
But they worship on Saturday.
They worship on Saturday, yes. They say that Saturday was the Sabbath, and they're right, that it was the Sabbath, but we worship on Sunday. We worship Christ's birth, resurrection.
They have such a good medical school.
Yeah, they do. They do.
That's good.
And a lot of the things that they do are actually helpful. So we've got all this stuff in place. World Bank. And we have all of these trade agreements. The trade agreements are actually one way of making a one world government, taking in international trade agreement policies between nations like GATT, General Agreement on Traffic and Trade, founded in 1947, the legal agreement supported currently by 23 nations on eliminating barriers to international trade by reducing quotas, tariffs, and subsidies. But it's a way of organizing a one world government, getting these people to break down some of their barriers. And the trade agreements have come between nations like USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada, which replaced NAFTA. And then we've got CAFTA. This is the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and FTA, which is the Free Trade Agreement, which helps companies to enter the global marketplace and compete more easily on a world scene. There are dozens of such other agreements between nations. For 75 years, nations have been interconnected through the International Monetary Fund, in other words, the World Bank, and many international trade agreements. Every nation on earth is economically dependent on other nations for their survival. So these free trade agreements, we depend on China as much as China is dependent on us, even though we may see each other as natural and competing enemies. When the Antichrist comes, the machinery to power the economic system of the world is already in place. The nations are already economically connected by international financing through the World Bank and the international trade agreements. So now we're going to jump into how they're able to get this idea across to so many people. They do this through the deliberate dumbing down of America. And I had a friend, Charlotte Iserby, who was out of Maine. She helped me write my first doctoral dissertation based upon this very subject. She was in the Reagan administration in the Department of Education. How she got in there, she didn't have the credentials to get in there, but she was. And as a member, she was able to gather up all this information, and she put it in a locker. She got it home, and then she sent it to Human Events magazine, which published it, and that got her fired. But she'd already captured all this information, and she put it in a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. It's an excellent book, by the way. It's worth reading. It's not hard to read. But she has detailed everything that they were attempting to do. Now, this wasn't Reagan's fault. It was actually the Department of Education was put in by...
Carter.
Huh? Carter, yeah, Jimmy Carter. So And really, yeah, it's actually a communist organization, because if you can control the education of the entire nation, you can direct it to whatever you want. But if you have every parent teaching their children, which is the way the Bible teaches us to do, then you have no control. So you need to have a Department of Education which can force that they can determine what should be taught. So the transformation of American education had profoundly destructive consequences. By 12th grade, American children are math and science dunces by international standards. The need to see government schools not as they claim to be or once were, but as they are, irreformable. For example, it's kind of like having a Christian brothel, as having a Christian public school. The public school is designed purposely, it's run by humanists. It's a humanistic, you send your kids to a yeah, almost satanic, we would call that, humanistic, I'm trying to remember what I used to call it. But anyway, the Department of Education is basically that. A survey published in the summer of 2001 by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation found that a quarter of teenagers had no idea that the American states fought each other in the Civil War, that 13 original colonies declared their independence from England, 10% couldn't identify the first president of the United States, 1/3 didn't know who Abraham Lincoln was, he did not know who the Mississippi flowed down to the Gulf of Mexico, or who the U.S. fought in World War II. This guy, Alan Quist, he wrote these books, and I was working on one of my dissertations, and he sent me the second book even before it got published. But the book shows how by taking control of the public school curriculum, rewriting American history and calling it social studies, I would call it socialist studies, undermining national sovereignty, minimizing natural law, promoting environmentalism, requiring multiculturalism, in other words, all beliefs are equally valid, restructuring government and redefining education as job skills. See, education it used to be that the royalty would train their children with a liberal education. Liberal meaning knowing a little bit about everything, so they could rule the country. Well, we wanted to be able to train our children so that they would be qualified to rule the country. Everybody would have this liberal education. And this is why they had, one of the first laws passed was the deliberate dumbing down, or the No, the first, it was called the Old Deluder Satan Act. In other words, you need to teach your children how to read so they can read their Bible, so they can hold the government accountable for violating Scripture. So, because we're not in a democracy, we're in a republic where the government is responsible as much. We are in charge. The government is run by us, we're not run by the government as it would be in a socialist or a communist system. So the people need to be able to. Everyone needs to be the king. We are the king, and so we need to have a liberal education. Liberal meaning we need to know a lot about everything that's going on so we can make good decisions. So the effect was to reduce education to job skills. That's what they want to do. That's why they got school to work. They want to teach you how to operate a cashier. They don't want to teach you how to know how to make decisions that'll be beneficial to the country itself. So the elimination of any mention of the Second Amendment, that's for our right to bear arms, because like Iran, for example, if the people don't have arms, you can just slaughter them in the streets. They can't resist. Same thing in China, killing 60 million of their own people. It's called democide. The elimination of any mention of the Second Amendment and the overemphasis on environment, tolerance, and global citizenship, along with the certification of teachers and extensive NAEP testing, which focuses more on attitudes and beliefs than on math and reading, demonstrates what the stated agenda of the new federal curriculum is. Rewriting the nation's curriculum, civics education instead should be considered central to the purposes of American education. As McCune said, the new federal curriculum is all about restructuring America. The agenda is not primarily educational, it is primarily ideological and political. So redefining the media. In fact, in other words, the media is now engaged in propaganda, not objective information. So every school, every journalistic school today is advertorial. In other words, they come up with some kind of belief system, and then they write around to support that belief system. And that's the way they're taught, not to report the news. So it means, in other words, Agenda 21 is shaping public behavior. In other words, the media is now engaged in propaganda, non-objective information. Out of the 700 media outlets about school shooting, only 9 media outlets indicated that the assistant principal had used a gun to stop it. And this is a book that he sent to me before it got published. This is America's Schools. And the agenda includes world government versus national sovereignty, failed integrated math versus proven traditional math, group-oriented discovery versus individual knowledge-based learning. The group learns as a group instead of individuals, and every individual is capable of different things. He has a picture, one cartoon showing a snake, a turtle, a fish, a monkey, a lion, and various other animals, and they say, okay, your job is to climb that tree. We all have different abilities, and you need to appeal to the different abilities and help each child to develop those abilities. So this is what education has become. History is anti-American. Reading is whole word. Whole word was used in Boston for 6 months. They threw it out because it was so bad. Whole word was basically used for people who were deaf. They couldn't use phonics because they couldn't hear their own pronunciation of the word. So they would look at the picture and they would see the word and they'd associate the picture with the word, but you can only learn so many words that way. We use phonics, you can learn tens of thousands of words. So ethics, values, clarification, everybody makes up their own, basically, ethics. And connected math, that is so ridiculous. And biology, evolution, truth is relative, government is globalism, Christianity is humanism, economics is John Maynard Keynes, which is based upon Marxist ideas, and basically borrow and borrow, borrow, and it was totally wrong. Basically it goes against what Scripture teaches. Psychology is secular versus biblical. Law is positivism, which that's another word for humanism as opposed to theism. It rejected anything spiritual. And then sociology was feminism, abortion, LGBTQ. All of this was Marxist oriented. Philosophy is naturalism, dialectical materialism, and mystic monism. And here's some of the Hollywood atheists: Brad Pitt, Kevin Bacon, Keanu Reeves, Bruce Lee, some of your favorite actors. Hugh Hefner, Morgan Freeman, Larry King. Yeah. So anyway, then what happens is they have to somehow explain things without God. If you're going to be able to create this kind of a world government, you have to have them somehow not going to put someone else over them, which was what God would be. God would be over them, and they don't want anybody over them. They want to be God. So the government becomes God. And so the only way to do that the only way of explaining things without God is evolution. That's the only thing they've come up with. And so you have to be able to answer them. And I like to answer them with just look at the origin of the universe. His invisible power and attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made, so that they're without excuse. You just look around you, you know. And so by their fruits you will know them, true of individuals as well as true of world views. And one of the most egregious of all evolutionary scenarios is a wonderland of evolutionary cosmophysics. Here we encounter an ever-changing kaleidoscope of quantum fluctuations of nothing into everything, cosmic inflation, multiple universes, 10-dimensional spaces, effects without causes, black holes, universes reproducing themselves, ordered systems out of chaotic explosions, hyperstrings, loops of time, and all kinds of marvels generated by higher dimensional mathematics and computer simulations. Modern astrophysics, in fact, are currently speculating that the universe itself spontaneously evolved out of nothing. And in this picture, the universe came into existence as a fluctuation in a quantum mechanical vacuum. We asked the guy that came up with that wording, said, what is that? What is a quantum fluctuation in a quantum mechanical vacuum? And he said, I don't know. He just made it up. And the fact is, a vacuum is not nothing. A vacuum takes up space. It has a lot of character qualities. So anyway, in other words, a tiny bit of nothing packed so tightly together that this is basically the Big Bang. A tiny bit of nothing packed so tightly together that it blew up and produced all the matter in the universe. First, the nothingness can't pack itself together to have no way to push itself into a pile. Secondly, a vacuum has no density. It's said that the nothingness got very dense and that's why it exploded, but a total vacuum is the opposite of total density. Third, there would be no ignition to explode the nothingness. No fire, no match. It couldn't be a chemical explosion. There were no chemicals. It couldn't be a nuclear explosion. There were no atoms. And fourth, there'd be no way to expand. How can you expand what isn't there? Even if the more magical vacuum could somehow be pulled together by gravity, what would cause the pile of emptiness to push outward? The gravity which brought it together would keep it from expanding. Fifth, nothingness can't produce heat. The intense heat caused by the exploding nothingness is supposed to change the nothingness into protons, neutrons, and electrons. First, an empty vacuum in the extreme cold of outer space can't get hot by itself. Second, an empty void cannot magically change itself into matter. Third, there can't be any heat without an energy source. And then you've got the mass 5 and mass 8 nuclear gaps, which keep it from growing any bigger than that. So, anyway,
Order doesn't come from chaos.
and I like to just picture, for one thing, our own solar system. There are about 7 theories about the origin of the solar system: the nebular hypothesis, fission theory, capture theory, accretion theory, planetary collision theory, stellar collision theory, gas cloud theory. All of these things fall apart. All 7 theories require circling gas which contracts into the sun. In other words, I asked that we got 96 moons out there and nobody can explain how one moon started. In fact, one professor was giving a lecture and he said the best explanation for the Earth's moon is observational error. It's not there. There is no naturalistic explanation for the moon. And there's no explanation for the Saturn's moon. We have one moon circling in the same order, following another moon. They're in the exact same. They never collide. Saturn, with 33 moons, one of them named Phoebe, has an orbital almost perpendicular to Saturn's equator. This is difficult for evolutionists to explain.
You're saying that our moon comes close to one of Saturn's moons?
What?
Our moon?
No. What I was saying is that that Saturn has one moon that's following the other one in the same exact pattern, in the same orbit, and they never collide. It's chasing the other one around. I mean, in the moons, what's interesting is the Earth is not made of the same substance as the sun. The sun is basically hydrogen and helium. The moons is not made of the same substance as the Earth. And none of the moons, or their respective planets, are made of the same substance as the planets. So where did the moons come from? And not only that, but you go out into outer space, outside of our solar system, outside of our galaxy. A lot of those stars have planets with moons.
Creator.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they know that. I mean, but anyway. So I look at things when I used to debate atheists, I say, you look at the eye, the human eye, has 10 million photoreceptor cells. Each one has the capacity to perform the equivalent of 500 nonlinear simultaneous differential equations 100 times a millisecond. So when you consider there's 10 million of them interacting with each other in complex ways, it would take a Cray supercomputer over 100 years to simulate what takes place in the back of your eye many times every second. And those are the cones. And then you've got the muscles in the eye. It's interesting that both of the eyes, working independently from another, are able to focus on the same things, like taking 2 revolvers and hitting the bullseye with both of them every time. If that doesn't work that way, you have a problem with focusing your eyes. But you have all of these different muscles turning the eye this way, up and down, and then the eye that they focus, the one that rotates it, so that you don't have to rotate your head. And then you've got the iris opening and closing, and then the lens changing its shape so they can focus on something. amazing things that the eyes can do, the muscles in the eye. And the complexity of the human ear. The human eardrum can sense 1/10 the diameter of a hydrogen atom motion, and it communicates that message to the three bones, the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, which never grow. And they actually go up against another membrane attached to the cochlea, which has three chambers. The inner chamber, called the cochlea duct, has the organ of cortea and tectoral membrane, and between those two are thousands of tiny hair cells. Each one has a trapdoor with a spring cell attached that opens and closes up to 20,000 times a second to let a single charged sodium on, which we interpret as sound. So we are fearfully and wonderfully made. You can say you can have Einstein's brain. Where did that spring cell come from?
I had a professor that,
There's a picture of some of that. It's like a Rube Goldberg
I had a
machine.
professor that came to the Lord because he studied the ear.
Really? That's cool. And then you get to DNA. And this one, I read a whole book on this subject, and so I'm condensing that entire book down to one slide. So if you had sufficient DNA to code 124 proteins and sufficient protein to house and catalyze the DNA independently evolved, subsequently associated together to form the first living entity, their individual probabilities must be multiplied. The total probability would be 1/10 to the 89,132nd power. That's the probability of forming DNA, times 1/10 to the 78,436 power. That's the probability of forming the 124 proteins, equals 1/10 to the 167,568th power, assuming 1 million Earths around every star in the universe, each having all of its oceans full of nucleotides, linking and form DNAs every second for 10 billion years. It's estimated that the amount of DNA necessary to code 100 billion people could be contained in half an aspirin tablet. A living entity consisting of 124 proteins of 400 amino acids, each is the theoretical smallest organism, but in reality, even a simple bacterium, the Escherichia coli, the common intestinal inhabitant of man and animal, contains 3 million DNA-based pairs. Thus, it could manufacture 2,500 proteins. That's 20 times the amount that we just talked about, the number of proteins of 400 amino acids each. Dave Cooperage, he's a friend of mine, in his book on probabilities, argues that the time necessary to form one protein is commensurate with the time necessary for an amoeba crawling at the breathtaking speed of 1 inch per year to move the entire mass 10 to the 64th galaxies, the size of ours, one atom at a time, across a string stretched 3 billion light year diameter of the universe. That's one protein. I think he was just having fun with it. But anyway, second, despite the virtual impossible odds that proteins ever arose by chance processes, there's not the remotest reason to believe they could ever form a membrane-encased, self-reproducing, self-repairing, metabolizing living cell. That's a jump in complexity that nobody's even imagined how it could come about, and that's what caused Michael Behe to wrote the book Darwin's Black Box. He was a cell biologist. He was a Catholic. He was not a Christian, but he believed that this is impossible. This could not happen by chance. And that's basically, this is the chemistry of a single human cell. In fact, that's not all of it. And this is an interesting guy, Carl Owen Dunbar. He said that he stated that fossils provide the only evidence that evolution has occurred on this planet. So you take a tooth and you can come up with all kinds of creative ideas. And so we got fossils, and Colin Patterson, he was the head of the British Museum, had the largest fossil collection in the world. And Luther Sutherland read his book called Evolution. He said, I noticed you didn't include any transitional forms in your book on fossils. And Colin Patterson wrote back and said, I would have loved to have included some if I'd have had any, but I don't even know how to tell an artist how to draw one, because I don't know what one would look like. So then Colin Patterson went around and asked all the leaders in the field of evolution. These are the guys writing the books on the subject. Is there anything about evolution that we know to be true?
No.
And none of them could come up with anything that they knew to be true. You know, maybe this happened, possibly this happened, but there was nothing that they actually knew to be true.
Sounds like a function.
And this is some of the guys. My attempts to demonstrate evolution by an experiment carried on for more than 40 years have completely failed. That's a famous botanist, and Dr. N.H. Nilsson. Evolutionist thesis has become more stringently unthinkable than ever before. Wolfgang Smith. The only competing explanation for the order we see in biological world is the notion of special creation. Niles Eldredge, he's a paleontologist and evolutionist. Not one change in species into another is on record. We cannot prove that a single species has been changed. That was Charles Darwin. What Darwin believed is that these animals changed somewhere over there, and then they flew, crawled, or swam over to our area. But they changed somewhere else. But he never saw them change,
No evidence.
where he was at. Evolution requires immediate forms between species, and paleontology does not provide them. And then I still think that to the unprejudiced, the fossil record of plants is in favor of special creation. Can you imagine how an orchid, a duckweed, or a palm tree have come from the same ancestry? And we have evidence for this assumption. The evolutionist must be prepared with an answer, but I think he would break down before an inquisition. And fossils are not made now. These two guys, there was two scientists tried to make some fossils. According to their school textbooks, it should not be hard to do, so they basically placed some dead fish in wire cages and dropped them into several Louisiana lagoons and bayous. When the man returned 6.5 days later, they found that bacteria and scavengers had consumed all the soft parts of the fish and had scattered the bones in the cages. Sedimentary strata are filled with fish fossils, and yet when a fish dies today, it never fossilizes. The only way you can get a fossil is rapid burial and sedimentation, which you only get in a flood context. So the flood is an indication of worldwide flood is where the fossils came. We have sharks that are within like 1/10 of an inch. They've been flattened that much. And so, this sedimentary strata are filled with fish fossils, yet fish dies today. It doesn't. When a fish dies, its body floats on the surface. It sinks to the bottom and is devoured rather quickly, actually in a matter of hours, by other fish. However, the fossil fish found in sedimentary rocks is often preserved with its bones intact. Entire shoals of fish over large areas, numbering billions of specimens, are found in a state of agony, but with no mark of a scavenger's attack. The fact that dead animals normally do not produce fossils. You have all of the the bison in the Midwest. They died, but scavengers ate them. They didn't become fossils. Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say the evidence that we dug up for these bones were they killed during a worldwide flood, right?
Yeah. Most the fossils themselves need rapid burial and sedimentation, which you only get in a flood type context. That's where you get it.
What about the giants? Have we found evidence of that?
I'm sorry, what?
What about the giants that the Bible has talked about? What about evidence of that?
The giants?
They were also killed in the worldwide flood, right?
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, we had what we called the Nephilim, which may have been giants. I assume they were. There's a T-Rex having lunch. There's some of the sizes of them. This is what happened to the dinosaurs. They missed the ark. Rats. Was that today? And then all you women, if you want to choose one of these guys for your life partner, there you go. It's interesting that no animal has white eyes. They put whiteness on their eyes to make them look human. But if you look at all the animals, there is no white. Each time one specimen is found, why not hundreds of thousands of them? If these are our ancestors, they should be millions of specimens. There should be so many people alive today. There should have been large numbers of half-ape people alive during the millions of years that men are said to have lived on this planet. Why are only pieces of a bone found for each specimen, never a complete skeleton? And only the bones are found there. And each one of these I go through each one, but we don't have time to do it. Each one of them was either a human or it was a fake. And the thing is, pretty much the apes were pretty much left to themselves to chart their own heritage. But humans, if you could find a so-called pre-human fossil, you get your name in lights, you become this great scientist, and all kinds of money would come because they want to prove evolution, so they come up with all these ideas, and none of them were actually true. One of them was built from the tooth of an extinct pig. The Piltdown man was a total hoax. The Nebraska man was built from the tooth of an extinct pig, and it wasn't extinct. They found in Paraguay that pigs are alive and well. So we could go through that. But the only question that I've ever had a problem with debating with these people is when you have, how did the light get here from so far away when light can only travel 186,000 miles per second? And so for that answer, I go to the alternative synchrony convention of the Dasha. We call it the Yatsa solution. The fruit trees were grown on the third day. Animals were created on the sixth day, and the animals needed something to eat. So somehow those fruit trees had to, we call it sprout. In other words, fast beyond their normal time of gestation or growing period. So that's the same thing I think happened when the sick animal, when Adam and Eve looked up at the stars. He had to be able to see something. He didn't have to wait 20 billion years for the light to get here. God created it fully functional. The idea that you have to have a naturalistic explanation of everything on creation, how are you going to get a natural explanation for the creation itself, any creation miracle, or for the resurrection, or for the virgin birth, or for any of these other miracles that God has created? I mean, God is not limited to our naturalistic explanations for things, but he wanted us to be able to see the creation, so he placed us in a particular position in our galaxy where we have a perfect visual picture of our own galaxy as well as the other galaxies. And so God wanted us to see his creation. Look to the animal, his invisible power and attributes are clearly seen by those things, the things that he's made. He wanted us to see his creation. And so right now we've got over 1 trillion galaxies with over 1 trillion stars in some of the galaxies themselves. And I asked one of these guys, I go to the International Creation Conference. In fact, I spoke at one of them. These are the leading scientists in the world today. They come to these, and it only meets once every 5 years. And we used to meet in Pittsburgh at Duquesne University until they threw us out because they don't believe in creation. It's a Catholic university.
They don't believe in creation?
Well, they're kind of humanists. I mean, in a sense, they're not. Yeah, I shouldn't say that Catholics are, but the university itself, they're not young Earth creationists. They're more like evolutionists. What you've got is a group, they call them special, or they creation, they call them special creation. It's basically the same as evolution itself, except there's a God behind the process. Progressive creationism. Yeah, that's what we call it. Theistic evolution, progressive creation, it's the same thing, pretty much. The idea is there's a God behind the process, and so every once in a while God steps in. But if you ask the progressive creationist, the timeline, it's exactly the same as the atheistic evolutionist timeline. So they're using the same model exactly as the evolutionists, but they're saying there's a God behind the process. Well, it's sleeping into the Christian schools and Christian colleges and seminaries, this idea of progressive creationism. And if you believe in creation, progressive creationism, you have to basically deny the first 11 chapters of Genesis. In fact, they don't believe. This is one of their books right here. It's called Progressive Creationism, Adam and the Genome. The series focuses on the scientific side of the question, was there a time in history when only two individual Homo sapiens were living? Since 2009, Dennis Venema and the rest of the BioLogos community has consistently answered no. All the genetic evidence to date says the average breeding population of our ancestors had been larger than a single couple for at least 200,000 years, and there is no plausible model affirming a single unique pair of genetic progenitors less than 500,000 years ago that also accounts for the data we see in the genes of people today. In other words, there were 10,000 Eves and 10,000 Adams. That's where we came from, according to them. One of the main misconceptions is failing to understand that evolution is a population-level phenomenon. Species typically form slowly as populations do to the accumulation of numerous slight genetic differences that shift the average characteristics of a population over time. All that is required to start this process is some sort of genetic barrier between the two populations. And the same species are reproductively isolated. Genetic changes in the one population are not shared with the other, or vice versa. Over the many, many generations, enough changes may accumulate in the two populations that their average characteristics are different enough that they would no longer recognize each member of the same species. That's crazy. You know? That's what they're saying, and that's what's permeating our educational system today.
Damnable heresy.
This is basically what the Bible teaches, and you can kind of see this. And Adam was alive not too much difference from Noah. When they lived 930 years, 969 for Methuselah, you can see that then the age has gone down to 70 years rather quickly. So, missing generations. There are no missing generations. Assuming that these creations are, how many generations are missing between Genesis 5 and 11? And of course we know that it says in Jude that the seventh from Adam, there were no missing. There was nobody missing it. So it is, Adam was so old when Seth was born. Seth was so old when it goes right down the line. When Enosh was born. Okay, so then we're going to cover a couple more things real quick. Mutations. Mutation is like shooting a bullet at a chromosome and destroying some of the genes. It's not adding any new teleonomy or specific information to the genetic code. It's simply destroying some of the information that's there, and as specificity increases, the role played by spontaneity decreases. The more complex the system is, the less likely a random process is going to increase that complexity. It's like throwing my watch against the wall floor and expecting it to add 2 more functions, or throwing my computer against the wall and expecting to add 2 more programs. It's not likely to happen, and that's what mutations do. But mutation is the only mechanism that would cause evolution to occur at all. In fact, that's where I went from Darwinism to neo-Darwinism. Darwinism taught natural selection or survival of the fittest. But that's a tautology. That's not a statement of any fact. A tautology just is the survival of the fittest. Of course the fittest survive. Who else is going to survive? So they had to come up with a mechanism that would cause change, and the only mechanism that anybody's come up with is mutations. So we have these idea of mutations, but the mutation is a destructive process. It's not adding in new information to the genetic code. It's simply destroying the information that's there, and the more complex the system is, the less likely a random process is going to increase that complexity. In fact, if you change one thing, you're likely to affect something else. Like you take one gear in the watch, you change that, it's going to affect all the gears that are associated with it, and every gene affects every other gene. And that's what basically Ernst Mayr said. He was a co-worker with Stephen Jay Gould. I challenged Stephen Jay Gould in front of 4,000 people in Elliott Hall of Music. He was the leading evolutionist of our day. I said, where did the substance of the universe come from? And he said, that's not science. I said, well, let's assume we got matter. How did we get life? And he said, that's not science. Well, let's assume we got life. How did we go from simple to complex? And he said, that's not science. And yet his talk, the title of his talk was Creativity and Evolution. His solution was that in third world countries, they cut up truck tires and use it for sandals. The idea is that our ears were not, I said, if that's true, in other words, the hands that we have were not designed to operate a computer keyboard or play a piano or a clarinet. That's just how we use them. And I said, well, if that's true, then our ears were not designed for hearing and our eyes were not designed for seeing. Is that what you're saying? Well, I added one more question. He gathered his stuff and ran off the stage. The question I was going to ask him was, Henry Morris, as I was coming here, I asked Henry Morris, said, would you ask him this? And so I said, Henry Morris had a question to ask you, and that's when he gathered his stuff, left. He didn't want me to ask the question. Anyway, But what I'm saying is Ernest Meyer was a co-worker with Stephen Jay Gould. Stephen Jay Gould is a creationist now. He's dead. He died. So now he's a creationist. But it's the last hope. The process of mutation is the only known source of new materials of genetic variability, hence of evolution. That's T. Dobzhansky, an American scientist. He's an evolutionist. It remains true to say that we know of no other way that random mutation by which new hereditary variation comes into being, nor any process other than natural selection by which the hereditary constitution of a population changes from one generation to another. Yet we've not been able to prove the mutations actually produce evolution. The complete proof of the utilization of mutations in evolution under natural conditions has not yet been given. That's Julian Huxley, Darwin's bulldog. Well, that was his father. So neo-Darwinians speculate that mutations accomplish all the cross-species changes and then natural selection afterward refined them. This, of course, assumes that mutations in natural selection are positive and purposeful. However, nobody's ever seen a positive mutation, ever. They have done some things. The mutation has actually caused the organism to not produce a protein that would kill itself. In other words, some of the immune systems kick in when something affects it to preserve this life, but it doesn't become more complex. It reacts to an accident, a hazard, to protect itself, but it never does increase its viability or it increase its, well, it does survive, but it doesn't increase its complexity. Nowhere does it do that. And at first, not once has there ever been recorded an instance of a truly beneficial mutation, one which is known mutation and not merely a reshuffling of latent characteristics in the genes, nor such a mutation that was permanent, passing on from one generation to another. There are things we call genetic markers. And I'll finish with this. They had these rats, and they had this rat, they tied him to a chair, and every time he smelled fresh fruit, they would give him a shock. And so the rat finally got to be terrified of the smell of fresh fruit. Now, normally rats will run, that's food, they'll go towards it. But every time he smelled fresh fruit, he would run away from it. And so would his sons and his grandsons. And that's the genetic marker. You're always more tempted by the things that you've experienced. And so here he's experienced them, but the thing is, the sins of the father are visited among the children of the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Visited means they're experiencing that same thing in the womb, or in this genetic makeup of the gene itself. And so that sperm that goes into the next generation has a genetic marker that is basically linked to the thing that he experienced. And that is passed on to the next generation. And that's why if you are particularly involved in some kind of sin, that sin can be passed on to your third and fourth generation. In other words, they're not responsible for your sin, but they may be more tempted by it because they've experienced it in the womb, in a sense. Anyway, for that, I guess I will call it quits, and we can take up next week. We're on slide 236 of 518.
All right, give me a hand.
Oh, yeah, all right. In a video, one that he's been telling you called Connecting the Dots.
You sent that to me?
But the real title was what the song.
Did you record this?
Yeah, he did too. But,
I didn't sit so I could see it.
yeah, we'll have to. You didn't put me in.
Yeah, it's on my, it's on my Rumble channel.
He's got a Rumble channel. So
It's got the whole thing on a playlist.
Oh, how do I find that?
Well, if you have your phone,
Can you just send it to my phone?
I could. It's, if you go to Rumble and then you search for the title is Take Back My Vote, you just type that in.
I've never been on
Oh, you haven't been on that?
it's more free.
Yeah, I can send it.
Facebook